The crisp fall air settled over the small town of Pine Hollow like a blanket of foreboding. The streets were quiet, lined with houses that had long since become familiar to anyone who grew up there. Rust-colored leaves skittered across the cracked sidewalks as the wind carried a faint smell of damp earth and wood smoke from nearby chimneys. The town was picturesque in its decay, an aging beauty marked by peeling paint, sagging porches, and the steady, predictable rhythm of life. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and everyone knew when someone didn't belong. For Ellie Harper, returning home for the fall had always felt like stepping into a memory. She had moved to Boston after high school and rarely came back, except for holidays or to help with her father's store, a small antiques shop he had stubbornly kept open despite dwindling sales. But this year was different. Her father had passed unexpectedly over the summer, and Ellie had inherited both the shop and the family home, a weathered two-story house at the end of Willow Lane. She had planned to stay only a few weeks, settle affairs, and return to her life in the city. But Pine Hollow had a way of trapping people in its quiet gravity, and Ellie soon discovered that her return would be far from simple. The first night back in the house, Ellie noticed a cold draft that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. She wrapped herself in a thick blanket and tried to ignore it, telling herself the old house always felt colder after being empty for months. But as she sat reading through her father's old ledger book, she began to hear noises, soft, subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A creak from the floorboards above, a faint scratching from the attic, the kind of sounds an old house made when settling. Yet something felt wrong. The noises weren't random. They were deliberate, measured, like footsteps pacing in rhythm. Ellie told herself it was just her imagination. Her father's absence had left the house too quiet, and she had grown used to the constant murmur of life around her. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Shadows seemed to cling a little too long in corners, and reflections in mirrors sometimes appeared distorted, stretched in ways that made her skin crawl. It was on the third night that she first saw it. She had gone to check the attic for old boxes of inventory for the shop. The attic was filled with the smell of dust and mildew, and the only light came from a small window near the peak of the roof. As she sifted through a stack of boxes, she caught movement in the corner of her eye. A figure, a man, stood at the far edge of the attic, partially obscured by shadows. He was tall, thin, wearing a dark coat that seemed to absorb the light and a wide-brimmed hat that hid his face. Ellie froze, unable to breathe, but when she blinked, he was gone. Shaking, she descended the stairs and locked the attic door. "I'm just tired," she whispered to herself. "Stress, grief, that's all." But the events only grew stranger. Over the next week, she noticed things moving around the house. Doors that she was sure she had locked were left slightly ajar. Items in her father's shop were displaced, the same antique figurines she had carefully arranged now scattered across the shelves. At first, she attributed it to exhaustion or careless handling, but soon a pattern emerged. Objects moved in ways that seemed purposeful, as if someone or something was rearranging them deliberately. Then came the whispers. She first heard them late one night while sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea and trying to calm her nerves. Faint at first, like the wind through the trees, they grew louder, forming words that made her blood run cold. "Ellie, come here." She jumped, spilling her tea across the counter. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for the light. Nothing. The kitchen was empty, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed her, coming from walls, floors, even the shadows themselves. One evening, she decided to leave the house and visit her childhood friend, Marcus, who lived a few blocks away. As she stepped outside, the wind carried a chill that seemed unnatural, biting into her skin. The streets of Pine Hollow were deserted, unnervingly so, and the trees lining the lane twisted in the wind like dark sentinels. She tried to shake off the feeling, blaming her imagination again. But when she glanced back at the house, she swore she saw the silhouette of the man standing at the window, wide-brimmed hat tilted low, watching her leave. Marcus listened intently when she told him what was happening. He was skeptical at first, but when she described the figure in the attic and the whispers that followed her, he grew quiet, his face pale. "Ellie, there's a story," he said finally, "about this town, about the Harrows." Ellie frowned. The Harrows? They were an old family, Marcus said. Rich, powerful, and obsessed with controlling their land. Every fall, people say one of them comes back. Not alive, not dead, just watching, waiting. The story goes that they attach themselves to a house, a family, and they won't leave until the bloodline is gone. It's mostly superstition, but some of the older families swear it's real. Ellie laughed nervously, trying to hide her fear. So, what you're saying is, a ghost is stalking me? Marcus didn't answer. That night, Ellie barricaded the doors and windows. She slept in the living room, surrounded by candles, clutching a baseball bat. Around midnight, the whispering returned, louder, more insistent. She could hear footsteps pacing upstairs, dragging along the old wooden floors. She told herself it was the wind again, that the house was settling, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. The following morning, she found muddy footprints leading from the back door to the living room, stopping abruptly in front of the couch where she had slept. She didn't recognize the prints. They were too long, too narrow, almost claw-like. Fear gnawed at her, but she pushed it down, determined to find a rational explanation. Days passed. The town seemed to grow quieter as October deepened, the streets choked with leaves, the wind carrying the scent of decay. Ellie became a prisoner in her own home, leaving only when necessary and always checking over her shoulder. Each night, the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker, the figure in the attic more frequent. She started seeing him in fleeting glimpses, a dark shape at the corner of her vision, a hat tilted low in the darkness, always watching, never moving closer, but never leaving either. One evening, Ellie found an old journal belonging to her father, hidden behind a false panel in the shop. The entries were filled with mundane notes about the business at first, but gradually they took a darker turn. Her father wrote about feeling watched, about hearing footsteps and whispers, about seeing the figure in the attic. The final entries were barely legible, smeared with what looked like tears, or maybe blood. "He is here," the last line read. "Always watching. He waits." Panic set in. Ellie considered leaving town, but every time she tried to pack, she felt an invisible force pushing her back, a weight on her chest that refused to be ignored. Even the car seemed reluctant to start, as if the town itself conspired to keep her there. On Halloween night, the terror reached its peak. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, twisting and writhing. Ellie heard the footsteps again, louder, faster, circling the house. She clutched the journal and ran to the attic, hoping to confront whatever was haunting her. The attic door creaked open. In the dim light, she saw him, the figure she had feared for weeks. His hat shadowed his face, but she could feel his eyes boring into her. The whispers were deafening now, calling her name over and over, surrounding her like a storm. Ellie backed away, heart hammering, but the figure moved closer, impossibly silent. Desperate, she grabbed an old mirror from the corner and held it up. The figure recoiled slightly, and for the first time she saw more than just a shadow. The man's face was pale and distorted, eyes hollow, mouth twisted in a permanent snarl. He raised a hand toward her, and the temperature in the attic plummeted, her breath visible in the icy air. Ellie screamed and swung the mirror like a weapon. The figure vanished, leaving only a cold wind in its place. She didn't stop to look back, fleeing down the stairs and out the front door into the darkened street. The town was silent, but she didn't care. She ran until the houses thinned and the trees swallowed the road. The next morning, residents found the Harper house empty. Lights burned through the night, but no one answered the door. Windows were locked from the inside, and the attic door was sealed tight. Inside, the furniture had been rearranged as if someone or something had been living there, moving through the rooms. The journal lay open on the floor, pages fluttering in a breeze that shouldn't have existed. Ellie was never found. Some say she fled to another state, living in fear of the figure that had haunted her home. Others whisper that she was claimed by it, drawn into the shadows that linger in Pine Hollow every fall. Every October, residents report strange noises from the Harper house, footsteps, whispers, and the sound of someone pacing the attic. Shadows move in corners where no light falls, and a wide-brimmed hat is sometimes glimpsed in the window, watching, always watching. Children dare each other to approach the house, but most turn back before reaching the porch, convinced they feel eyes on them. And if you listen closely on a windy October night, you can hear a faint voice whispering a name into the chill air. Ellie. Story the end. The wind had a way of carrying things farther than you'd expect out in rural Pennsylvania. Sound, smoke, secrets. Every fall, when the leaves started turning the same rusty color as dried blood, the wind seemed to shift into something colder, something watching. People in the towns between Scranton and the New York border swore fall was different there. Not just pretty, different. I didn't believe any of that when I arrived. I'd grown up in Maryland, where fall mostly meant apple cider, pumpkin patches, and my mother filling the entire house with cinnamon scents until it felt like we lived inside a candle. Moving to a rural part of Pennsylvania to work at a small high school was supposed to be quiet, peaceful. My first job after college, English teacher, cross-country assistant coach, living alone in a 2-story rental at the edge of town where the forest pressed right up to the backyard, like an animal sniffing the door. I moved in late September, the time when every local kept saying the same thing. You picked the wrong month to move here. They always laughed after saying it, but the laugh didn't match the words. The house was old, built sometime in the 1880s, according to the property manager. It had been renovated on the inside, but it still felt aged, like the bones of the place never forgot anything. It creaked constantly, even when the wind wasn't touching it. There were 2 floors, a small attic I never used, and a basement with stone walls that felt slick no matter how dry it was outside. But rent was cheap, and I'd been broke. The first week was normal. I prepped lessons, walked the wooded trail behind the house, and tried calling my mom, though service was spotty enough that some calls dropped before I could say hello. The house sat too far from town for a reliable signal. Most nights I heard the usual rural noises, crickets, owls, the distant hum of trucks on the highway. Nothing strange. The second week is when things began changing. It started with scraping. Not loud, not violent, just a faint scrape, like something dragging one branch across another. It came from the woods behind the house around 2 a.m. I woke to it, sat up, listened. At first I assumed it was just deer. Everything makes weird sounds in the woods at night. I pulled the blankets up, rolled over, and ignored it. The scraping returned the next night and the next. Always between 1:45 and 2:30 a.m. Always the same rhythm. Scrape, pause, scrape, scrape, long pause, scrape, like something learning how to mimic the sound of a person writing with chalk. By night 5, it wasn't outside anymore. It was under the house. The basement door clicked softly in the dark, as if touched. Then I heard the scraping beneath the floorboards, closer, clearer, as though whatever had been in the woods wanted inside. I didn't go down there that night. I didn't sleep, either. The next morning, I made the mistake of mentioning the sound to the school's history teacher, Mr. Callahan, who'd lived in the area his whole life. He gave me a strange look that lingered too long. "You hear it already? Already?" I asked. "What's that supposed to mean?" He hesitated. Not the nervous kind of hesitation, but something like resignation. "You're right up next to Barren Hollow, that patch of woods behind your place. Locals say every fall something wakes up in there. Old superstition. Kids try to scare each other with stories about it. It's nothing." But he didn't say it like it was nothing. Later that day, one of the seniors, a cross-country runner named Lucas, asked where I lived. When I told him, he winced. "My cousin stayed in that house last year during deer season," he said. "He lasted 2 weeks." I chuckled. "Was it the scraping? Everyone keeps asking me about scraping." Lucas stopped tying his shoes. His expression changed in a way I still remember. His teenage bravado melted, replaced by something sober, almost fearful. "You hear it?" I didn't like the way he said that. "It's probably just animals," I said. He shook his head slowly. "No, sir. My cousin said the same thing. But it wasn't animals. He'd hear the scraping at night, and then he started hearing footsteps. Not heavy like a person, more like something walking with its hands. He said they touched the walls. He moved out fast." I waited for him to grin, to say he was joking. He didn't. The bus horn honked in the parking lot, and he jogged off, leaving me with the kind of silence that crawls inside your thoughts. That night, nothing happened. No scraping, no clicks, no noises at all. That silence was worse. Around midnight, the power flickered, dims of light blinking through the house. I checked the hallway, half expecting someone to be standing at the end of it, but it was empty. I fell asleep on the couch downstairs with the TV on low. At 3:12 a.m., I woke to footsteps. Soft, fast, skittering footsteps, moving from one side of the living room wall to the other. They sounded like they were inside the walls. I froze, breathing shallow. The steps paused right behind my head on the other side of the wall. Not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate, listening. Then I heard a tap, a single tap against the drywall. I held my breath. The tapping repeated 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. A slow drag followed, like nails scraping down the wall. I sat up immediately, heart slamming, and the moment I moved, the sound stopped. Gone. As if whatever had made it was startled by me, too. I grabbed a flashlight and edged toward the basement door. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or possum that somehow got into the wall, but deep down I knew no animal could match the rhythm of those taps. They'd been too intentional. I opened the basement door. The stairwell dropped into a darker black than the rest of the house, as if the light avoided it. The bulb at the top didn't work. I shined my flashlight down, but the beam looked strangely muted, landing only halfway down the stairs before dissolving into the dark. Something moved in that dark. Not toward me, just a slight shifting, like weight adjusting on stone. I didn't go down. I shut the door and pushed the heavy oak table against it, listening hard for anything following. Nothing came. But sleep never did either. The next morning, the basement door stood uncovered. The table was pushed aside. I hadn't moved it. I knew I hadn't. My hands shook as I put it back. School gave me a good distraction until one of the counselors, a woman in her 50s named Carolyn, stopped me after classes. "You rent the old Fairwick place, don't you?" she asked. I nodded. Her face softened into something like pity. "If the nights get strange, you should know there's a story about that house." I didn't want to hear it. But I couldn't stop myself. She continued. "There was a family who lived there generations ago, back when the town was still trying to clear more land for farming. The father disappeared one October night while out near Barren Hollow. The mother went missing the next night. Their son, 8 years old, was found in the basement weeks later, alive." Her voice dropped. But he wasn't right anymore. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, unless it was given to him in the dark. When the doctors asked what happened to his parents, the boy carved something into the table beside his bed, scraped it in with his fingernails. I swallowed. "What did he carve?" Her eyes held mine. "It waits." My skin crawled. I wanted to tell her everything, the footsteps, the wall tapping, the scraping, but something about the way she spoke made me feel like that would make it worse. Instead, I went home stubborn, determined not to be scared out of a house I was paying for. That night, the tapping returned, but it didn't come from the wall. It came from beneath the floor at the foot of my bed. Slow, almost curious taps, like fingers drumming on wood. I moved to sleep on the couch again. At 2:47 a.m., the scraping returned too. Only this time, it wasn't under the house. It was outside the living room window. The sound dragged across the glass, barely audible but unmistakable, slow, long. I kept my eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. I didn't want to see who or what was out there. The scraping stopped. A soft, wet breath fogged the bottom corner of the window. Something was breathing against the glass. I stayed still, muscles locked, praying it couldn't see me. Wind pressed against the house leaves skittered across the porch, but the breath stayed steady. Almost human, but not quite. Harder, faster, too warm. Then came the tapping. On the glass. 1 tap. 2 taps. 3. I didn't move until dawn, and when I finally sat up, the window was clean. No smudges, no breath marks. Nothing. I convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Sleep deprivation could play tricks, couldn't it? Teaching all day, grading late, barely eating. Maybe my mind was filling in the silence with nightmares. That theory lasted until Saturday evening. It was just before sunset when I went outside to grab firewood stacked near the tree line. The air was cold enough to make each breath visible. As I bent to lift a log, something caught my eye deeper in the woods. A shape. I straightened slowly, pulse tightening. Someone stood between the trees about 20 yards in, tall, slightly hunched, completely still. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their head and shoulders. "Hello?" I called. No answer. They didn't move. "Are you lost?" Nothing. The figure remained half-shrouded by the orange glow of the last light slipping through the woods. Leaves shifted around them, but they didn't react. I lifted my phone to use the flashlight feature. The figure stepped back a single step, then disappeared into the darker part of the forest without a sound. My stomach dropped. I went inside and locked every door. Uh, I tried calling the police, but my phone dropped the call 3 times. When service finally held long enough, the dispatcher told me officers would patrol the road nearby, but unless I saw someone trespassing directly, they couldn't do much. That night, I kept every light on. It didn't help. At 1:12 a.m., something crawled onto the roof. The sound traveled from one side of the house to the other, quick, scraping movements too fast for a raccoon, too controlled for a deer. When it reached the section above the living room, the steps slowed. Then they stopped. I held my breath. A soft, rhythmic tapping began on the ceiling above me, like fingers, moving along the beams, tracking where I lay beneath. Tap. Tap, directly above my chest. The ceiling groaned slightly under the weight of whatever was on it. I wanted to run, to scream, to call someone, but I stayed completely still, eyes on the ceiling, waiting for it to break through. It didn't. After a minute, the tapping stopped and the steps moved again, skittering toward the edge of the roof before disappearing entirely. I forced myself to sit up. The silence that followed was massive, swallowing, like the house itself was holding its breath with me. I stayed awake the rest of the night. The next morning, I found deep grooves in the roof shingles. 4 parallel lines running almost 5 feet long, as if something with long fingers had dug into the roof while crawling. I decided I'd pack up and break the lease. No job was worth this. I started shoving clothes into a bag. I threw notebooks and grading papers into boxes. I didn't care what I forgot. I just needed out. At noon, there was a knock on the door. I jumped so hard I dropped my bag. A man stood on the porch, older, maybe mid-60s, wearing a jacket too thin for the temperature. His posture was stiff, like he didn't want to be there. "You're the new tenant," he said without greeting. I nodded cautiously. "I'm Tom Fairwick," he continued. Fairwick, the family the house had originally belonged to. I opened the door only a few inches. "Is something wrong?" His eyes flicked past me into the house. He didn't step closer. If anything, he leaned slightly away. "You should leave," he said bluntly. "Right now." A chill ran down my spine. "I'm trying to," I said. "I've been hearing." "Don't talk about it," he snapped. His voice didn't rise, but something in it tightened. "Don't describe it. Don't acknowledge it. If you start giving it shape with words, it pays more attention." I stared. "What do you mean? What is it?" He looked toward the woods. "It waits," he whispered, the words from the boy's carving. I stepped back instinctively. He swallowed hard. "Fall is when it comes out. Always fall. My great-grandparents saw it. My grandfather saw it. My father saw it. And I—" He trailed off, eyes glassy for a second. "I saw it once, when I was 8. My breath hitched. What does it want?" He shook his head. "It doesn't want anything. It just observes. But the more attention you give it, the closer it gets. And once you notice it fully, really see it, you can't unsee it. That's when it tries to come inside." I felt cold down to my bones. "You think it's after me?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Instead, he nodded toward his car. "Pack light. Leave now. Don't stay one more night." I didn't argue. I grabbed the bare essentials, clothes, my laptop, a few important documents, and shoved them into my trunk. I didn't bother locking up the house. I didn't care about anything left behind. Tom didn't drive away until he saw my car leaving the gravel driveway. But as I pulled onto the road, I checked my rearview mirror. He wasn't watching me. He was staring into the woods behind the house, and something stood between the trees, tall, hunched, impossibly still. I accelerated and didn't slow down until I reached the main highway. I booked a cheap motel an hour south. It was bright, clean, and nowhere near any woods. I should have felt safe. But that night, at 3:02 a.m., I woke to tapping on the motel window. 3 taps. Slow, deliberate. My heart nearly stopped. I forced myself to look. A tall shadow stood outside the window, its head tilted slightly as if listening. No breath fog this time. No scraping. Just tapping. Soft, patient tapping. I backed away until I hit the opposite wall. The tapping stopped. The shadow remained still for a long, terrifying moment before it stepped out of the glow of the parking lot lights and melted into darkness. I didn't sleep again. In the morning, I checked out. The clerk asked why I looked so pale. I told her I had a family emergency and needed to keep driving. I drove south until the trees thinned and the air warmed enough to feel like fall wasn't choking everything. I moved in with a friend temporarily. Told the school something came up and I needed time. They gave me a leave of absence. For weeks, nothing happened. No tapping, no footsteps, no scraping. I tried convincing myself it had stayed behind, that maybe leaving the house severed whatever it was that had noticed me. Until Halloween. I was staying on my friend's couch, dozing off while he watched TV in the next room. Wind pushed fallen leaves against the balcony. Kids laughed in the distance. Then faintly, so faintly I thought I imagined it, I heard it. Scrape. Pause. Scrape, scrape. Long pause. Scrape. My chest tightened. I sat up slowly. The sound was coming from the balcony. I stepped closer, pulse hammering, and listened. Something dragged its fingers slowly down the sliding glass door. I backed away, shaking, phone in hand, but unable to call anyone. Unable to look away. A shadow stretched across the glass, tall, warped, bent slightly, as if its spine didn't match a human shape anymore. It tapped once, twice, 3 times. My friend walked into the room just as the shadow slipped out of view, dissolving into the night. I told him nothing. What could I say? That something followed me from a house in the woods, that it crawled on the roof, scraped windows, tapped walls, breathed through glass. He'd think I was insane. But every fall since then, every October without fail, I hear it. Sometimes outside the window, sometimes in the walls, sometimes beneath the floor. Always patient, always waiting. And each year it seems closer, as if fall isn't a season anymore. It's a countdown. Story the end. The wind had changed that October. It carried a cold, dry edge that made every rustling leaf sound sharper than it should, like the forest itself was whispering secrets it wasn't supposed to. I noticed it the moment I stepped out of my car in northern Vermont. The town of Hollow Creek was small, barely a dot on the map, but people drove through it all the time on their way to ski resorts or autumn festivals. I was moving there for a fresh start, a teaching job at the local high school, and a chance to get away from the city chaos I had spent most of my 20s in. The house I rented was a 2-story colonial built in the late 1800s, set just far enough from the main road that it felt isolated, but close enough that you could hear the occasional truck rumble past. There was a thick stand of trees behind it, and a small creek ran along the edge of the property. Perfect, I thought, for a quiet life, for running, for thinking. I didn't yet know that isolation has a weight in the fall, that the wind carries more than just leaves. The first few nights were ordinary. I unpacked, set up my bedroom, and tried to get used to the forested darkness outside. The wind groaned around the corners of the house, and the creek bubbled faintly in the night. I woke once or twice to strange sounds, snaps and scuffs, but assumed it was wildlife. Maybe raccoons, maybe deer. There was no road nearby, no neighbors close enough to make the noises human. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. Then the scraping started. It was faint at first, just enough to tug me awake around 2 a.m. It came from the woods behind the house, a slow, dragging sound like branches rubbing together, but wrong, too deliberate. It wasn't random. I sat up in bed and listened, holding my breath. Nothing moved in the shadows I could see, but the sound repeated in a pattern. Scrape, pause, scrape, scrape, pause. It lasted only a few minutes, then stopped. I chalked it up to the wind. Trees brush against each other. That's all it was. The next night, the scraping returned, but closer. I swore I could hear it on the side of the house, moving along the siding, climbing the trunk of a tree. When I turned on the porch light, nothing was there. I opened the door, and the cool October air hit my face, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wet earth. Still, nothing. I thought maybe it was a raccoon or some other nocturnal animal. Maybe. But the rhythm, it was too organized to be random. By the end of the week, I was on edge. The forest behind the house seemed alive in a way that went beyond ordinary wildlife. Shadows moved against the trees even when the wind was still. I sometimes thought I glimpsed a figure just beyond the edge of my vision, only to see empty branches when I turned my head. The first full-blown incident happened 10 days after I moved in. I had gone to bed around 11 p.m., exhausted from unpacking and preparing lesson plans. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows. I was just drifting off when I heard it, scraping, but this time under the house. The basement door was at the far end of the hallway. I froze, listening. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Slow, deliberate. Then silence. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. I stayed in bed, trying not to breathe too loudly, until dawn. When I finally forced myself to get up, the basement door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it open. Over the next few days, the noises escalated. They moved from the basement to the walls themselves. At night, I would lie in bed and hear tapping, like someone lightly drumming on the plaster. Sometimes the taps were slow and tentative, other times fast and precise, as if counting something. The moments of silence between them felt heavier than the sounds themselves. One evening, I mentioned it to the town's librarian, a woman named Mrs. Hollis who had lived in Hollow Creek her entire life. Her reaction froze me. "You're renting the old Darrow house?" she asked, her voice dropping. "Yes," I said, confused. "Do you know something about it?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if the library walls themselves might be listening. "Many years ago, a family lived there. One October, the father disappeared while walking near the creek. The mother vanished the next night. Their daughter, she was found in the basement, alone. She wouldn't speak. She wouldn't eat. All she ever said was that something was watching, waiting. People called it the fall presence. Some say it only comes out in autumn." I laughed nervously. "The fall presence?" Mrs. Hollis's eyes didn't meet mine. "Some things in the forest don't like being disturbed, and some things, when you notice them, start to notice you back." I told myself it was superstition. Small towns always have their legends. I should have ignored it. I didn't. The next night, I was lying in bed when I felt a weight in the room, like someone standing just behind the wall. I could hear faint dragging along the floorboards, soft at first, then faster. Then tapping. A slow, methodical tap, tap, tap directly above my head. I tried to tell myself it was the house settling. It wasn't. The weight pressed closer. I couldn't move. My heartbeat was deafening. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the basement. The beam barely penetrated the darkness. The basement door was closed. The light revealed nothing. I climbed out of bed slowly and pressed my ear to the door. Scrape. Scrape. Pause. Something was under the house again. Something aware of me. I didn't sleep that night. Days passed, and the pattern continued. I began locking all doors, placing heavy furniture against them, yet the sounds persisted. One night, I even swore I heard something breathing on the glass of my bedroom window. Moist, warm breaths fogging the pane. By mid-October, the local high school students started talking. Rumors of the Darrow house were common knowledge, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had heard strange noises in the forest. Lucas, a senior on the cross-country team, told me his cousin had spent 2 weeks in that house last fall and ran screaming out, never returning. "Did it follow him?" I asked. Lucas didn't answer. He just shook his head. The silence said enough. I decided I couldn't stay. Every night, the sounds grew bolder, scraping across walls, footsteps on the roof, taps on windows. The forest seemed to stretch closer, shadows lengthening unnaturally. Packing my things, I kept hearing movement just beyond the windows, just at the edge of the trees. I tried to ignore it, stuffing clothes and books into boxes. The last night I was woken by a series of soft knocks on the basement door, then the ceiling, then the walls. The house shivered as if it were alive, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it fully. My phone signal failed when I tried to call anyone. I stayed awake until dawn, then drove south, not looking back. Even then, I couldn't escape. The scraping followed in my mind, the tapping haunted my dreams. Leaves rustled unnaturally in every forest I drove past, and every shadow seemed to bend too perfectly toward me. Years later, every fall, I still hear it. Not the way you hear wind or rain. It scratches at the edges of your awareness, waiting for you to notice. The scraping is patient, the tapping is deliberate, and somewhere just beyond the line of sight, something watches. Always watching. I never returned to Hollow Creek. I live now in a city where the trees are sparse, where the wind doesn't carry whispers from the forest. And yet when October comes, I swear I hear it, soft against the walls of my apartment, dragging something across the floor, tapping, waiting. Some things, once they notice you, never forget. Story the end. The first cold week of October had crept in overnight, quiet and unnoticed, until I stepped outside that morning and felt the kind of chill that slips under your clothes and settles against your spine. I remember breathing out a fogged cloud, surprised at how quickly fall had arrived in rural Pennsylvania. Our town, Hollow Creek, never saw change gradually. Seasons snapped into place like someone flipping a switch. My name is Daniel, and in 2019 I was 23, newly moved back home after college because my mother's health was declining faster than anyone expected. Hollow Creek wasn't exactly a thriving hub, just a scattering of old houses, woods thick enough to lose yourself in, and farm roads that curled into the hills like veins. But it was home. I'd grown up there, learned to fish in Miller's Pond, gone to Friday night bonfires out by the abandoned quarry, and biked through the woods behind my house so many times I could imagine the trails with my eyes closed. But that fall, my first fall back, felt wrong before anything even happened. It was like the forest was holding its breath. The leaves hadn't changed normally. Entire branches went from green to a rusted brown overnight, skipping the blazing reds and golds we were used to. The air smelled sharp, metallic almost, and squirrels, deer, even stray dogs were scarce, like everything was hiding from something I couldn't see. I chalked it up to paranoia. Coming home after years away was strange enough. Adjusting to my mother's fragile state was stranger. I didn't have the mental space to worry about the vibes of the forest. But in the end, the forest wasn't interested in my mental space. It had its own story to tell. Mom's house sat at the edge of the tree line. It was a narrow, two-story farmhouse built in the 1940s and held together by more memories than nails. The backyard faded into a slope that led towards Snyder Woods, a stretch of forest that locals half-jokingly called the Old Bones. Kids grew up hearing stories about strange noises, disappearing farm animals, and shadows that didn't act like shadows should. I never took them seriously. My generation used the woods as shortcuts, hideouts, or places to smoke without parents catching on. But that October, the woods were quiet. Too quiet. Mom mentioned it first. "Those woods feel different this year," she murmured one evening while I helped her sort prescriptions at the kitchen table. Her hair had thinned and her hands shook slightly as she worked, but her eyes were still sharp. "I hear things at night. Rustling. Low, moaning sometimes." "Probably deer," I said, though I hadn't seen a single deer since coming home. "They're not deer sounds." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. My childhood bedroom was still the same, sports posters on the wall, a desk covered in old trophy plaques. But there was one difference. The window latch had broken. It never bothered me until that week when the wind picked up. The window would rattle in its frame at all hours of the night, sometimes creaking open an inch or two before I shoved it shut again. The first night I heard the footsteps, I blamed the window. I woke around 1:30 a.m. to a soft crunch of leaves just outside. At first I thought it was wind pushing branches around, but wind didn't make rhythmic, heavy steps, each one deliberate and slow, the kind that came from something moving on two legs. I sat up, listening. The footsteps circled the house, starting near the backyard, moving along the side, then pausing underneath my window. I held my breath. Then a soft scrape, like nails dragging across the wood siding. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone. The window rattled once, softly as if brushed by a hand, and then everything went silent. The next morning I walked around the house. The grass was wet with dew, but near my window the dirt had been disturbed. Deep impressions too long to be boot prints, too uneven to be made by a deer. They looked like footprints, but stretched somehow. I stared at them too long. Long enough to feel foolish, long enough to feel watched. Mom's voice called from the porch, breaking my trance. "I told you," she said simply, not even asking what I was looking at. 3 days later, things escalated. It started with the smell. I'd gone outside to move the garbage cans to the curb, only to gag as soon as I stepped past the porch. The air reeked of rot, wet, decaying flesh. It was so overpowering I had to cover my mouth. I followed the scent to the tree line. There, half hidden beneath a cluster of dying ferns, lay a deer, or what was left of one. Its body was torn open like someone had split it with their bare hands. Bones were exposed, ribs cracked outward. Its head was twisted impossibly far to one side, nearly backward. Something had eaten it, but messy, violently, not like any predator I knew. A coppery tang filled my mouth, though I wasn't bleeding. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back toward the house. I called animal control, but they said someone would come take a look within a few days. Rural life at its finest. Mom didn't seem surprised. "I heard something last night," she whispered as she stirred her tea. "Growling, like a person trying to sound like an animal." Mom, please. Don't freak yourself out. I'm not the one it wants, she said quietly. You are. I almost dropped my mug. What? Why would you say that? She lifted her eyes to mine, tired, sunken, and full of something I didn't understand. Because it wasn't the woods I heard last night, Danny. It was someone tapping on the walls. Your walls. That same night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me tense up. Around midnight, I went downstairs for water, trying to shake off the paranoia. The kitchen window above the sink faced the backyard. Usually, only darkness stared back. But that night, as I filled my glass, I noticed something pale and round behind the glass. I leaned closer. It was a face, but not a normal one. Its eyes were too wide, glassy and reflecting the porch light like an animal's. Its skin was ashen, and its mouth was open far too wide, like it had no hinge stopping it. I froze. Every muscle locked. The face twitched, then it pressed clear to the glass, distorting its features strangely, almost liquid-like. The glass fogged with its breath. My knees nearly buckled, but I managed to flip the porch light on. In an instant, the face vanished. No footsteps, no rustling, no movement, just the empty yard and the black opening of the woods. My breath shook as I backed away. I checked every lock twice and sat awake until sunrise. When I told Mom, she didn't question it. Instead, she said something that made my blood run cold. You saw it, she murmured. The one that comes when the leaves die. What are you talking about? She clenched her frail hands. I saw it too, when I was your age. Mom ended up in the hospital later that week. Her condition worsened, suddenly, rapidly, and she collapsed one morning while trying to get out of bed. The doctors weren't sure why her vitals dipped so drastically. I stayed with her for 2 days straight until the nurses insisted I go home to rest. But home didn't feel like home anymore. The air was heavier, colder, and as I walked through the front door, I noticed immediately that something was wrong. The smell was back. Rot, decay, thick and suffocating. It seeped down the hallway from upstairs, my bedroom. I forced myself to go up, every step feeling like it carried me closer to something I wasn't meant to see. My door was cracked open. Inside, the stink was worst. I flicked the light switch. The window was open, wide open, despite me locking it before I left. And sitting on my bed was something wrapped in torn leaves and wet soil. I stepped closer, heart slamming against my ribs. It was a bundle. Inside the bundle, a dead crow, its wings ripped off, its body sliced open. Inside the crow's chest cavity, tucked like a gift, was a piece of fabric. Blue, faded, one of my old t-shirts. My vision swayed, my hands shook violently. Something had been inside my room. Something had left a message. The next sound I heard was a whisper, soft, almost tender, from the backyard. Daniel. My name, drawn out in a rasping, unnatural voice. I ran out of the house into my truck, peeling out of the driveway so fast gravel sprayed against the mailbox. I didn't go back for 2 days. I didn't sleep. Not until Mom insisted I come see her because she needed to tell me something while she still remembered it. Her story didn't belong in any sane reality. When she was 19, long before I was born, she and her friends used to hike deep into Snyder Woods. They knew all the trails, the creeks, the hidden clearings, but there was one place they avoided. Old Sycamore Hollow, a bowl-shaped depression full of dead trees and thick mud. Locals said it was cursed. Animals refused to enter. Compasses spun wildly. People sometimes lost hours there, wandering in circles. One October night on a dare, Mom and her friends went anyway. At first it was quiet, she whispered from her hospital bed, voice fading. Too quiet. No owls, no wind, nothing. We walked in maybe 30 yards before we realized we couldn't hear each other's footsteps anymore. She swallowed. Then we heard it, a voice calling my name. Cold swept up my spine. A shape moved behind the trees. Tall, wrong. Like something that learned to be human by watching from far away. Its limbs bent too much, its head turned too far, and it whispered my name exactly how I had heard my mother say it. I ran. We all ran. She closed her eyes tightly, but it followed me home for months. I tried to speak, but no words came. It left things, dead things. It watched from windows, and one night it stood in the hallway outside my bedroom. Its silhouette, it stretched almost to the ceiling. I hid under the blankets until sunrise. Why didn't it take you? I whispered. Mom opened her eyes. Because I gave it something it wanted more. I stared at her. What could it possibly want more than you? Her lips trembled. Me? Nothing. But before it left, it It touched my stomach. I didn't know I was pregnant yet. My breath stopped. You, she whispered. The room spun. I clenched the bed rail to stay upright. Mom reached out weakly, gripping my wrist. It marks the firstborn, she said. It comes for them when the woods begin to die. You were safe while you were away. But now, a monitor beeped wildly. A nurse rushed in. I was pushed aside. Mom didn't finish her sentence. She slipped into unconsciousness. I didn't get another chance to speak to her. I stayed at a motel that night, refusing to return home, but just after midnight, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft taps. I froze in bed, staring at the door. Then, tap, tap. This time slower. Knowing, I crept to the peephole. At first I saw nothing, then something rose into view. Not a face, not fully. Just an eye, pale, reflecting moonlight, blinking too slowly. I stumbled back, heart slamming, mouth dry. The knob twitched, twisted. The deadbolt groaned as if pressured from the other side. I grabbed the dresser and shoved it against the door. The metal groaning stopped, replaced by a soft scrape, like nails against wood, like before. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I knew I couldn't run forever. I needed answers. I needed to go back to Old Sycamore Hollow. I reached the woods by late afternoon. The air was colder than usual. Still. Heavy. The leaves underfoot were damp and blackened. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. No birds, no insects, no wind. The forest felt like a sealed room. I followed Mom's directions, my phone GPS useless, no signal. After 20 minutes, the trees thinned, opening into a shallow depression filled with dark, muddy soil. Dead sycamore trees clawed at the sky like skeletal limbs. Old Sycamore Hollow. As soon as I stepped into the clearing, my ears popped, like pressure dropping in a plane. Then the smell hit. Decay, rot, damp earth, and something else, something sweet and sickly, like old blood. The shadows between the trees moved. Something tall emerged slowly, stepping into dim light. My throat closed. It was wrong. It stood maybe 7 feet tall, but thin, too thin, like stretched skin over mismatched bones. Its limbs were long and bending, jointed in ways no human limbs should be. Its skin was grayish, tight, almost translucent. Patches of dark earth clung to its body like it had crawled out of the ground. Its head hung to one side as if the neck couldn't fully support it. When it saw me, its mouth stretched impossibly wide. "Daniel," it rasped. I staggered back. "No," I whispered. "Stay away from me." It stepped forward, each movement jerky, unnatural. "First," it hissed. "Mine." I turned and ran. Branches tore at my clothes. Roots snatched my feet. The forest behind me trembled, trees shifting as something massive cut through them without effort. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. The forest wasn't normal. Paths twisted, changed, looped. Mom had been right. Something grabbed the back of my shirt. I screamed and fell forward, ripping free, scrambling through the dirt. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Light finally broke through the trees. I burst into the backyard of our house, falling to my knees. Behind me, the woods fell silent, completely silent. It didn't cross the tree line, but it stood there just inside the shadows, watching. Its head tilted slowly. Then it whispered, voice drifting across the yard like dead leaves. "Not yet." Then it faded back into the dark. Mom died the next morning. They said heart failure. But I knew. Something had taken too much from her for too long. I didn't go back to the house after the funeral. I couldn't. The thing waited there in the woods. It had patience older than anything human. I moved across the country, changed phone numbers, changed everything. But sometimes, especially in the fall, I swear I see a shape outside my window. Tall, thin, waiting. Sometimes I wake to the sound of leaves crunching outside. Sometimes I hear my name whispered in a voice that isn't a voice. And sometimes I smell decay. I know it will come for me eventually. Maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, but fall always returns, and so will it. Story, the end. The air in Maple Hollow always felt different after Labor Day. Cooler, thinner, touched by something that didn't entirely feel like nature. Every year, the leaves burned into shades of copper and flame, and every year the sun seemed to set a little faster than it should have. Most people in town chalked that feeling up to nostalgia, or the coming winter, or maybe the fact that so many of the older houses creaked louder once the temperature dropped. But everyone agreed the fall was beautiful. I didn't grow up in Maple Hollow. I moved there when I was 29, trying to get away from the chaotic pace of Boston and the slow collapse of a long-term relationship. In a moment of impulsive clarity or insanity, still not sure which, I bought a fixer-upper on Hawthorne Road. The house had been on the market for almost a year, which should have raised questions, but at the time I only noticed the generous yard, the old-growth oak in the back, and the ridiculously low price. Fall was the first season I fully lived in Maple Hollow, and I was excited for it. I imagined warm cider, quiet walks, and the kind of peace you only get in small towns. I got some of that, but I also got something no one warned me about. Something I still struggle to understand, even now. The first strange thing happened in late September, only a few weeks after I moved in. I was raking leaves in the backyard when I found the first box. It was small, maybe 8 inches by 8 inches, made of old, fading wood with rusted metal corners. It was sitting beside the trunk of the oak tree, half covered in leaves, even though I'd been raking that area just minutes before. I would have noticed it. There was no way I could have missed it. Curiosity outweighed common sense. I knelt in the grass, brushed off the decaying leaves, and picked the box up. It was heavier than it looked. The lid wasn't locked, but it was stuck, so I had to pry it open with my house key. Inside, nestled on a piece of yellowing cloth, was a handful of dried red berries, small, shriveled, and strangely glossy. They looked like they'd been plucked decades ago, yet still somehow preserved. Beside them lay a small folded note. The handwriting was sharp and deliberate. "Leave an offering by first frost." That was it. No signature, no explanation. I remember glancing around my yard, half expecting a neighbor to be watching, waiting for a reaction. But no one was there. Just the quiet wind and the constant rustle of falling leaves. I threw the berries away immediately, tossed them into the compost bin without hesitation. The box I kept, though, not sure why. It felt wrong to throw it out. Maybe I thought it was an old keepsake from previous owners. Maybe I wanted to ask someone in town about it. Maybe I just didn't like the idea of putting something so old and oddly crafted into the trash. That night, as I lay in bed reading, I heard something hit the window. Not a tap, a thud. Heavy, like someone had lobbed a rock. When I pulled the curtain back, the yard was empty. The oak tree swayed in the wind. The moonlight caught something dark on the glass. I leaned closer. A crushed red berry. I rationalized it. Maybe a branch fell. Maybe a squirrel dropped something. I had no reason yet to suspect anyone. But the next morning, the box was sitting on my back porch. I was sure I had left it inside the shed. This time, instead of berries, the box held a small twig tied with black string. And another note: "Do not refuse." I wasn't superstitious. I wasn't scared. Irritated, maybe. I assumed someone was messing with me. Teenagers, probably. Small towns always seem to have groups of bored kids looking for trouble. When I asked the neighbors, especially the older ones, they all gave me the same polite smiles, the same carefully neutral expressions. "That house has its history," one woman told me, tightening her scarf as if the chill had deepened. "Most folks who lived there didn't stay long." When I asked why, she hesitated, then shrugged. "People spook themselves out. It's too close to the woods. Wind makes strange noises. You'll hear things at night. You just have to ignore them." She said it like she knew more but didn't want to share it. I brushed it off. People like to exaggerate. Old houses made noises. I wasn't the type to scare easily. Until October 3rd. That was the first night I saw something in my yard. It was close to midnight, and I was cleaning up after dinner when motion caught my eye through the kitchen window. At first, I thought it was a deer. But deer didn't stand upright. Deer didn't move with the awful, jerking stillness of a creature that couldn't decide whether it wanted to run or stay perfectly, unnaturally frozen. The figure was tall, too tall, even from 50 feet away. Lanky, with long limbs and a strange sloping posture. The yard was dark, but there was enough moonlight to see its outline clearly. It stood beneath the oak tree, watching the house, watching me. For a moment I thought I saw something hanging from its hand, a twig tied with black string. I turned off the kitchen light instinctively, backing out of the room. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't breathe. I just watched from the shadows. The figure didn't move, didn't even twitch. Then a cloud drifted across the moon, plunging the yard into deeper darkness. And when the light returned, the figure was gone. No movement, no footsteps, no sound, just gone. The next morning I found the third box. Larger, older, wet from dew, sitting square in the center of my porch like someone had measured the exact middle. Inside was a weathered stone with a strip of cloth wrapped around it. The cloth was stained with something brownish, old blood, maybe. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the note. Return what was taken. I hadn't taken anything, at least nothing I knew of. I drove straight to the town library. The librarian, a white-haired man named Dixon, went stiff when he heard my address. Hawthorne Road, he repeated. The old Carver place. I'd never heard that name. Was that the last family who lived there? The Carvers were the original owners back in the 40s. The land used to be bigger. Most of the block was their property. He hesitated. Not many families stuck around after them. Because of what? Trespassers? I asked. He gave me a sharp look. Not trespassers. Offerings. Something cold crawled down my spine. Offerings to who? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled a binder from under the counter. Old newspaper clippings, photos, handwritten town records. He flipped it open. This stays here, he warned, but pushed it toward me anyway. The first article was from 1952. Local child found dead near Old Carver Oak. No suspects identified. Disturbing symbols carved into bark. The second article was from 1957, then 1963, then 1971. Each described disappearances or unexplained injuries centered around the oak tree in what was now my backyard. Families moved away after each incident. Several described seeing a tall, watching figure. My hands felt numb as I closed the binder. What was taken? I asked. Dixon breathed out slowly like he'd been waiting for the question. The Carvers believed the tree was older than the town, older than the native settlements before that. They claimed something lived in it, not a ghost, not an animal, something older. His voice dropped. They said it protected the land as long as it received offerings every fall. The words sent a shiver across my neck. What kind of offerings? Different families offered different things, he said. Berries, twigs, stones, blood. His eyes met mine. Some families said the offerings kept the figure away. Others said the offerings kept the figure from taking something instead. The library felt suddenly too quiet. What happens if someone refuses? I asked. Dixon didn't blink. No one refuses twice. I left before he could say anything else. That night the noises started. Not creaking floors or settling wood, not typical old house sounds. These were deliberate. Footsteps circling the house, slow at first, the kind that almost blended with the wind. But over the next hour they grew louder, more frequent, more purposeful. At one point I heard breathing through the living room window. Slow, strained breaths fogging the glass. When I finally looked, there was a palm print smeared across the outside. Not a human handprint. Too long. Too narrow, too many joints. I didn't sleep. By morning, the fourth box was waiting on the porch. This one wasn't wooden. It was made of bark, raw, freshly peeled, still damp. It smelled like sap and earth and something rotten underneath. Inside, for the first time, there was no object, just a single line written in a trembling hand. Before first frost. I packed a bag and got in my car, ready to leave Maple Hollow entirely. Screw superstition. Screw the house. I could go back to Boston, get a hotel, deal with things later. But when I turned the ignition, the car didn't start. I tried again. Silence. My phone had no signal. The air outside thickened with mist, even though it was sunny. Leaves rustled, though there was no wind. And somewhere behind the house came a deep, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the yard, something that knew I was trying to escape. I ran back inside and locked every door. For hours, I sat with the curtains drawn, listening to the slow, scraping movement outside. Sometimes it stopped. Sometimes it circled. Sometimes it pressed close to the walls, close enough that I heard the wood groan with its weight. I didn't know what it wanted me to return, but I knew one thing. Ignoring it was making things worse. I searched the house, every room, every drawer, every loose floorboard. By late afternoon, I found something wedged behind the heater vent in the upstairs bedroom, a small brittle bone wrapped in cloth. The cloth matched the one from the stone in the third box. The bone looked disturbingly human. My stomach twisted as I unwrapped it. A note was tied to it with twine so thin it crumbled as I touched it. The paper disintegrated, but not before I saw a single word: return. I didn't know who had hidden it. Maybe a previous owner had found it and panicked. Maybe the Carvers themselves had left it, but I knew where it had to go. The yard was silent as I approached the oak tree. Not even birds sang. The entire world felt paused. I placed the bone at the roots of the oak. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground under the tree shifted, just slightly, like something beneath the soil was stretching, waking, rising. A long shadow unfolded behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The air grew colder. My breath came out in fog. Leaves swirled around my feet, though the air was still. The shadow drew closer. I felt it, its height, its wrongness, its weight, bending the air. Something touched my shoulder, not a hand, something like a branch, but warm. The ground rumbled softly. The bones sank into the soil as if pulled downward. The roots churned, swallowing it. The thing behind me leaned close, so close that I felt its breath against my neck, slow, wet, hungry. Then it whispered. A sound, not a word. A low, rustling exhale that felt like dead leaves sliding across stone. It meant something. I felt that meaning in my spine, in the cold seizing my limbs and my lungs struggling to remember how to breathe. Then the shadow drew back. When I finally turned around, it was gone. The yard was still again. Too still. That night, I slept for the first time in days, though the sleep was dreamless and heavy. In the morning, the boxes were gone, every single one, even the bark-stained one on the porch. I thought it was over. It wasn't. Throughout October, I felt watched constantly. Not in the house, never inside, but through the windows, from the yard, from the tree. Sometimes I saw a flicker of movement behind the branches. Sometimes I heard that dragging sound again, far in the woods. When Halloween came, the air dropped sharply. Frost formed on the grass overnight, early according to the forecast. That morning, another box waited on the porch, the same old wood and rusted corners as the first one. Inside lay a single red berry and a new note. Until next fall. I haven't tried to leave Maple Hollow since. I haven't ignored a single sign. Every year, when the leaves change, small boxes appear at my tree, sometimes 3, sometimes 7, sometimes 1. I always return what's inside. The watching figure still appears every fall, usually only once. Always near the oak, always silent. I've accepted that whatever lives there is older than the town, older than the tree, older than anything I want to understand. But every year around this time, when the first cold wind sweeps through Maple Hollow and the leaves take on that copper glow, I think about what Dixon said. No one refuses twice. And I wonder who refused last. Because sometimes at night, when the wind is cold and sharp, I hear something moving deep in the woods, something dragging, something hunting, something still hungry. Story the end. The wind had been picking up since late afternoon. The kind of restless October breeze that slipped under doors and rattled window frames. Amanda noticed it first while raking leaves in her parents' backyard, a chore she'd agreed to help with before heading back to Baltimore on Sunday. The trees behind the property, an untamed stretch of woods that her father insisted counted as part of the yard, were restless, their branches swaying and shivering like they were whispering to each other. The wind felt colder than it should have for mid-fall in Virginia, and she kept glancing over her shoulder at the tree line without really knowing why. Her father teased her for it. City living made you jumpy, he'd said, chuckling as he dragged another pile of leaves toward the ditch at the edge of the woods. This is normal out here. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the wind. It was the quiet between each gust, the way the woods went still, like they were listening. By evening, after her parents went to sleep, she sat on the couch in the dim living room, scrolling through her phone, half watching some documentary on the TV. The house made its usual noises, settling wood, creaking vents, but the wind outside kept rising in sharp whistles that made her pause and glance toward the front door. Every time she told herself she was being ridiculous, every time the next gust felt a little more intentional. She finally got up to make tea, hoping warm hands and a distraction would settle her nerves when she heard the first knock. Not a polite knock, a slow, deliberate, almost dragging thud. She froze in the kitchen doorway. It came again. 3 knocks, spaced out by several seconds. Her parents' house sat nearly a quarter mile from the nearest neighbor. Nobody came by this late. Nobody came by without calling. Amanda? Her mother's voice called from upstairs. Did someone knock? I think so, she said, surprised by how small her voice sounded. Her father stirred too, footsteps creaking above her. Who in the world? The knock came a third time, louder, harder. The tea kettle whined as if responding. Her father descended the stairs, grumbling, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Probably some kid messing around, he muttered, heading for the door. No, Amanda said quickly. Dad, don't. But he already had the deadbolt in his hand. He turned on the porch light and peeked through the peephole. Then he stepped back. There's no one. Her mother joined him, her robe pulled tight around her. You're sure it wasn't the wind? That was a fist, not the wind, he said, frowning. Amanda didn't like the way her father looked at the door after saying that, as if trying to convince himself as much as them. The rest of the night passed quietly. Too quietly. No more knocks, no more wind. The house felt like it was holding its breath. The next morning was bright, crisp, and deceptively calm. Her mother insisted the noises must have been branches hitting the porch railings. Her father blamed teenagers. Amanda didn't buy either theory. Still, daylight made it easier to brush off the unease. She planned to visit an old friend across town, but first she wanted some air. She grabbed a jacket and stepped outside, breathing in the cold, earthy scent of fallen leaves. As she walked toward the woods, she noticed something strange near the ditch where they had raked yesterday. A trail of flattened leaves leading deeper into the trees, like something heavy had been dragged, or someone had walked there repeatedly. She crouched down, brushing aside a few leaves. Beneath them, the soil was disturbed, freshly. Narrow impressions, like footprints, but longer, almost too long to be human. She stood quickly, heart thudding harder than she'd like to admit. She walked back to the house, trying not to look like she was hurrying. She left for town soon after, but the image of the tracks stayed in her head all day. It wasn't until that evening that things took a real turn. Amanda pulled into the driveway just after sunset, headlights sweeping across the yard. Everything looked normal at first. Her parents' cars, the porch light glowing warmly, the soft silhouettes of the woods in the distance. Then her headlights hit something on the porch. A smear, dark, uneven, streaked along the railing. Blood. She slammed the car door and ran to the porch. Her hand hovered over the stain but didn't touch it. It was still damp. She burst into the house. Mom? Dad? Her father stepped out of the kitchen. What's wrong? There's blood, she said breathlessly, on the porch. Her mother joined them, pressing a hand to her mouth. Oh my God. Her father grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. Probably an animal, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Amanda followed him around the porch as he scanned the area. The beam flickered over the railing, the steps, the yard. Then he stopped. What is that? He whispered. The light illuminated a trail of dark droplets leading away from the porch, across the grass toward the woods. The same direction as the tracks from earlier. We're calling the sheriff, her mother declared. She didn't wait for a response. She went inside to get the phone. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a calm voice. He inspected the porch, the blood, the trail. Could be a deer wandered close and got hurt, he said, crouching over the droplets. But the tracks yesterday, Amanda began. What tracks? She described them as best she could. The sheriff listened, expression unreadable. It's hunting season, he finally said. Plenty of animals running scared, but I'll take a look around the woods just to be sure. He walked the trail with a second deputy, their flashlights weaving through the dark. Amanda stood on the porch with her parents, trying to stay calm. After nearly 20 minutes, the men returned. Trail goes about 50 yards in, the sheriff said. Then it just stops. Nothing else. Could be the animal veered off or the trail dried up. Amanda swallowed hard. So that's it? You're leaving? He nodded. If anything else happens, call us. But right now, I don't see anything that suggests danger. He left them standing on the porch under the cold glow of the light. Amanda barely slept. 2 nights later, she woke to the sound of scratching. Not inside the house, outside. Against her bedroom window. Slow, rhythmic, almost methodical. She froze, every muscle tightening. Her phone sat on the nightstand. She grabbed it, like thumb hovering over the flashlight icon. But she didn't turn it on. She listened. Scratch. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. She carefully slid out of bed and crossed the room barefoot, her heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat. She reached the window slowly, 1 inch at a time, until she was close enough to hear her own breath fogging the glass. The scratching stopped. Silence. Amanda stayed still, barely breathing. Then a shape shifted just beyond the curtains. Something tall. Something standing close enough to the glass that she could hear it exhale. Her hand trembled as she gently pulled back the curtain. The The window reflected part of her room behind her, so for a second she saw only herself staring back, wide-eyed, terrified. Then the reflection moved. A shape leaned into view from the left, taller than any person she'd ever seen, its outline all wrong, its proportions stretched. Her breath caught, the thing's head tilted slowly toward her. A pale surface, skin, bone, glimmered in the darkness. No eyes, no features, just a smooth, blank face. Amanda stumbled backward with a strangled gasp and nearly fell over the bed. The tall figure didn't break the glass. It didn't make another sound. It simply moved away, so slowly she heard the leaves swish under its feet, until she couldn't hear anything at all. She ran to her parents' room, sobbing so hard she couldn't speak. Her father got his gun. Her mother called the sheriff again, but by the time law enforcement arrived, there were no tracks near Amanda's window. No scratches, no signs anything had been there. Her parents convinced themselves she had a nightmare. Amanda knew better. The next night, her father insisted on staying up in the living room with the gun. Amanda tried sleeping again, but only drifted in and out, waking at every little sound. Around 3 a.m., heavy footsteps thudded across the porch. Her father shot upright. Amanda already stood in her doorway, trembling. The footsteps were slow, purposeful. They passed the front door, then turned toward her bedroom window again. Her father moved to the window in the living room but didn't draw the curtain. He watched the shadow move across the gravel outside. Her mother joined him, whispering, "What is it? What is it?" Her father didn't speak. The shadow stretched across the siding, long arms, long legs, a tall, distorted torso. The silhouette of the blank face passed through the glow from the porch light for a split second. Her mother screamed. That broke everything. Her father threw the door open and shouted, "Hey, get the hell off my property!" The tall thing didn't run. It didn't even turn. It walked into the woods. The sheriff arrived again, more alert this time, less dismissive. Deputies swept the woods on foot. A canine unit arrived. For hours, flashlights flickered between the trees. They found nothing. No prints, no trace, not even broken branches. "What you saw was probably a trespasser," the sheriff said at dawn. "Somebody on stilts or some kind of costume. Kids these days." "That wasn't a costume," Amanda snapped. Her father backed her up. "I've hunted these woods for 30 years. That wasn't a man, and it didn't move like anything on two legs should." The sheriff didn't argue, but his expression said he didn't believe them. Amanda begged her parents to leave with her for a few days, but her father refused. "I'm not running from some freak in the woods," he said. "I'm staying right here until we figure this out." His stubbornness cost him. The next night, it returned. The wind picked up again, howling this time, and she felt the same horrible tension in the air as before. Her father stayed in the living room, and Amanda stayed awake in her room with her lamp on, sitting against the headboard with a blanket wrapped tightly around her. At 1:47 a.m., the porch boards creaked. Amanda felt it before she heard it. A prickling shift in the air, a drop in temperature so sudden her breath fogged. She heard each slow step vibrate through the floor. She reached for her phone to call out to her father, but the steps paused outside her window. Then something tapped the glass. Tap, tap. Her father shouted from the hall, "Get away from there." A thunderous crash shook the entire wall. Amanda screamed as the window cracked but didn't shatter. Her father fired a gunshot. Her mother yelled for Amanda to get away from the window. The tall thing made a sound then, not a human sound, not an animal sound, but something deep and resonant, like a low moan carried through a hollow body. The wind seemed to mimic it, echoing through the trees. Then it ran, not in a stumbling, awkward crash. No, it ran with impossible speed, vanishing into the forest with one long, loping stride after another. The sheriff came again. This time, he didn't pretend nothing was happening. They stayed until morning, the deputies circling the woods with rifles. Amanda booked her parents a hotel, but her father refused again. "This is our home," he insisted. "We're not abandoning it." Amanda was too exhausted to fight him. The next evening, Amanda tried to convince them again. "Dad, please. It shattered the window. What if it breaks in next time?" Her father hesitated, for the first time looking truly frightened. "I'll reinforce the windows tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about leaving." Tomorrow never came safely. It started with the smell. Around midnight, Amanda woke to a foul odor, wet soil, rotting leaves, and something metallic like blood. Her mother was already awake, whispering, "Do you smell that?" Amanda nodded, covering her mouth. A heavy thud hit the roof. Her father grabbed his gun and flashlight. "It's on the house," he whispered. Another thud. Then a long scrape that traveled across the shingles, slow and deliberate. Her mother clutched Amanda. "It's stronger than I thought," she whispered. "God help us." The scrape moved toward Amanda's room. Her father aimed the flashlight upward out the front door. White reflection flashed back. Something pale. The face, too close. It peered over the edge of the roof, blank features shiny in the beam. The sight froze her father solid. Amanda had never seen fear carved so deeply into another person. The tall thing dropped, not fell. Dropped like a weight, landing upright with unnatural grace. The ground shook. Her father fired. It didn't flinch. It lunged. Amanda barely had time to scream before chaos erupted. Her father shoved her mother back, yelling for Amanda to run, but the tall shape moved too fast. It reached the porch in a single stride. Amanda ran anyway, bolting toward the back door as the house erupted with noise. Shouts, breaking glass, the horrible groaning sound the creature made. She didn't look back. She sprinted into the woods, branches clawing at her arms. The cold bit her lungs. Behind her, she heard her mother's scream. Sharp, cut short. Her father shouted her name. A gunshot, a thud. Then silence. Only her frantic footsteps and her own ragged breathing. She ran until her legs buckled beneath her, like collapsing into a pile of leaves. She crawled behind a fallen log, shivering violently. Minutes passed. Then she heard it. A slow, heavy step. Leafy ground shifting under massive feet. It walked through the trees closer, then stopping. Listening. Its breath, a low, hollow moan, rolled through the forest. Amanda pressed a hand over her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. It passed within 20 feet of her hiding place. It exhaled again, a sound that vibrated through her bones. Then, finally, slowly, it walked away. She stayed hidden until dawn. When she returned to the house, the front door hung open. The living room was destroyed, splintered furniture, blood smeared across the wall. Her parents were gone. Not dead, not injured, gone. Completely removed, as if plucked from the house. No bodies, no footprints, no trace. The sheriff organized a search party. They combed the woods for days. State police joined, then federal agents, dogs, drones, everything. Nothing. Not a shred of clothing, not a smear of blood outside, not a sign of struggle past the living room. Her story, of course, spread fast. People called it hysteria, called her traumatized, called it a hoax, a delusion, a misidentification. But in town, people talked. A tall man walking along Route 11 at dusk, a pale figure near a barn on the far edge of the county, something watching from the tree line near an elementary school playground. Officials dismissed everything. Amanda knew they were lying, or terrified. 3 weeks later, she moved out of state. She never returned to her parents' home. The bank took it. The woods crept closer again. No one lives there now. Sometimes she dreams of the blank face, the slow knock on the glass, the long fingers scraping across her window, and sometimes late at night, when the wind picks up just right and the trees lean toward her apartment with that same restless shiver, she hears it again. Tap. Tap. Then silence. She hasn't opened her curtains after dark in months. Story the end. The first chill of autumn had settled over the small town of Hemlock Ridge, a place where the streets seemed narrower and the trees stood closer together than anywhere else in Maine. The leaves had turned into brilliant shades of orange, red, and gold, and they rustled in the crisp wind that carried the faint scent of wood smoke and damp earth. For most, it was a picturesque season, the kind that made you want to grab a hot cider and sit on your porch watching the world slow down. But for Riley Carter, a 27-year-old graphic designer who had moved back home after losing her job in Boston, it felt different, unnervingly different. Riley had returned to the family house she had grown up in, a 2-story colonial on Elm Street that her parents had sold after the divorce. It wasn't that she disliked it. The house was solid, comfortable, even, and it smelled faintly of cinnamon and old wood. But after weeks of being alone in the town, she used to know like the back of her hand, she started noticing things she couldn't quite explain. Small things at first, a picture frame slightly askew, the sensation of being watched from the corner of her eye, but then the feeling began to grow, like shadows pooling in the edges of her vision. The first real incident happened one Tuesday evening. Riley was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, binge watching old crime documentaries on the streaming service she had just discovered. The wind howled outside, shaking the branches against the windows, making the old glass creak. She heard a soft scratching noise coming from the hallway leading to her bedroom. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just the old house settling or a stray branch brushing against the siding. But then the sound grew louder, deliberate. It wasn't random. It was almost deliberate, rhythmic, like nails on wood. Her heart began to pound. "Hello," she called out, her voice wavering. No answer. She paused the show, listening. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the wooden floor. Riley told herself it was her imagination. The town had always been quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound seem enormous. She forced herself to laugh it off, retreating into the kitchen to pour a glass of water. As she walked back to the living room, she noticed the front door slightly ajar. She was certain she had locked it before curling up on the couch. Panic set in. She locked it again, triple-checked all the windows, and sat back down, shaking. For the rest of the night, she barely slept, convinced she wasn't alone. The following days were a blur of unease. Riley began noticing other things. The garden gate, which she had always kept shut, swinging open on its own. Strange footprints in the morning frost that led up to the house but never seemed to leave. And the sound of whispering voices that vanished whenever she turned to see where they were coming from. She tried to tell herself she was overreacting, that it was the stress of moving back and being unemployed. But each night, the feeling of being watched intensified, and the house seemed to breathe in ways it hadn't before. One evening, while going through old boxes in the attic, she found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were addressed to her mother, from a man she had never heard of. The letters were polite at first, romantic even, but they gradually became obsessive, almost angry. Her mother had never mentioned this man, and there were no pictures of him in the house. Riley felt a shiver run down her spine as she read through them, the words of obsession echoing through the empty attic. She put the letters back in the box, trying to push the unease away, but the wind outside seemed to respond to her fear, rattling the windows with a ferocity that shook the rafters. That night, Riley had a dream, vivid and horrifying. She was walking down Elm Street, but the houses were darker, twisted versions of themselves. Shadows stretched unnaturally, and from the corner of her eye, she saw a man standing in every doorway, watching her. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face, and no matter how fast she ran, he stayed at the periphery, always just out of reach. When she woke, drenched in sweat, she noticed something terrifying. Muddy footprints in her hallway, the exact same ones she had seen in the frost outside. They led to her bedroom door and stopped abruptly. Riley's hands trembled as she picked up her phone to call her friend, Jenna, who lived across town. The call went straight to voicemail. The next day, Riley decided she needed help. She drove to the Hemlock Ridge Library, hoping to find something about the old letters or the mysterious man. The town historian, Mr. Clark, was there. He was a frail elderly man with a memory as sharp as a knife and a love for local lore. Riley showed him the letters. His hands shook as he read through them. These are from Theodore Hargrove, he said finally, voice trembling. He was obsessed with your mother when she was a girl. There were rumors, dark rumors. They say he was unstable, dangerous. He disappeared 50 years ago, but there were always whispers that he never left Hemlock Ridge, that he watches. Riley laughed nervously, though it came out as a choke. Watches? That's ridiculous. I don't think it is, Mr. Clark said softly. People say he still haunts the town every fall, when the leaves turn and the air grows cold. They call it the watching season. It's when he comes back. Riley felt her stomach drop. Completely crazy, but the footprints, the doors, the letters. You're not imagining it, Mr. Clark said. He was obsessed with your mother, and now he might be obsessed with her bloodline. That night, Riley barricaded the doors and windows as best as she could. She slept in the living room with all the lights on, clutching a baseball bat. Around midnight, she heard the scratching again, louder this time, like something or someone was circling the house. She held her breath, listening. Then she heard the whispering, soft, guttural, almost chanting. It was a name, Riley. The fear was overwhelming. Riley wanted to leave, to run, but every time she tried, she felt an invisible weight pinning her down, as if the house itself refused to let her go. Hours passed like days. She didn't know if it was the wind or something else that moved the shadows along the walls. At dawn, exhausted and trembling, Riley noticed something in the yard. There was a figure standing among the trees at the edge of the property, a man in an old-fashioned suit, wide-brimmed hat tilted over his face. He didn't move, didn't blink, but she could feel his eyes on her. She backed into the house, slamming the door, and for a moment he vanished. The next few weeks were a blur of terror. Riley rarely left the house. Every night she heard scratching, dragging, whispering. Her phone died inexplicably. Food deliveries failed. Even her cat, a normally affectionate Maine Coon named Jasper, refused to enter the living room, hissing at the corners as if something unseen lurked there. Riley tried to research Hargrove's disappearance. Old newspapers told of a man obsessed with a young woman, her mother, who vanished mysteriously. Some said he drowned in the river, others whispered of darker fates, suggesting he never truly died. Riley felt herself slipping into paranoia. Every reflection in mirrors, every shadow in the corner of her eye became Theodore Hargrove. She started sleeping with the lights on, covering every window, double-locking doors, but it never helped. One particularly stormy night, Riley awoke to a crash in the attic. The roof shuddered with the force of the wind, but the sound wasn't just the storm, it was deliberate. She grabbed a flashlight and crept up the stairs, her heart hammering. The attic was empty. Or so it seemed. Then she saw it, a figure standing in the far corner, shrouded in shadow. The wide-brimmed hat was unmistakable. The man tilted his head as if studying her. His presence was suffocating, a cold, high, malevolent force pressing down on her chest. Riley screamed, but no sound came out. The figure reached a hand toward her, long and thin, and the moment it moved, everything went black. Riley woke in her bed, drenched in sweat, convinced it had been a nightmare. But then she noticed the footprints in the dust of the living room, leading to her bedroom door and stopping at her bed. She realized with a shiver that this wasn't a dream. It was real. Theodore Hargrove was still here, still watching, and the fall wasn't over. The weeks dragged on. Riley's friends called less often. Her calls went unanswered. She started leaving the house less, barely eating, barely sleeping, until one night the whispers grew louder. They were all around her now, chanting her name. She fled into the attic where the old letters were stored, clutching them like a talisman. Riley. The voice was behind her now, breath cold on her neck. She spun around, bat raised, but saw nothing. Then the letters flew from her hands as if caught in a gust of wind. The attic door slammed shut. She was trapped. By morning, the neighbors noticed the lights in the Carter house had gone out. The house stood silent, windows dark, as the first snow of fall dusted the lawn with a quiet, eerie calm. No one saw Riley leave, and the only trace of her was a single letter on the front porch, addressed to whoever dared to enter Hemlock Ridge. Do not come in, he watches, every fall. Years later, locals still whisper about the Carter house, especially in late October when the wind carries the scent of cinnamon and rot, and the leaves swirl unnaturally in the streets. Some say you can see a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching the empty house, wide-brimmed hat shadowing a pale, twisted face. And if you get too close, you swear you hear a whisper, Riley. Story. The end.